John, good to see you. Welcome back from Hacker Summer Camp. Hope you had a good time out there like I did. So,
Yes.
for those of us who are new to the idea, those of us viewing the show, Hacker Summer Camp is shorthand for Black Hat, Defcon, B-Sides Las Vegas, the week and a half or so of conferences every year in Las Vegas related to cybersecurity. And I've been going for probably a decade. John, how about yourself?
This was my fifth trip out there, so it's been probably close to a decade as well.
It's always a blast. I mean, it's the hottest part of the year in Las Vegas, and typically that means it's dry. Although this year was different.
Wow. Wow.
This year was quite an anomaly, and in fact, there was some real flooding. Yeah, kind of remarkable to be out there in the middle of that. It was a little crazy. But the conference is really what we're here to talk about, but all the conferences. So I figure I'll give you an opportunity to talk about some of your favorite talks from Black Hat.
It was definitely a fun trip. It was odd, like you said. I had one year I went out there and my bottoms of my shoes actually melted, my tennis shoes. So yeah, really, very real. So it was fun. Other than coming back, I'm a little under the weather. If you can't tell from my voice, we we won't talk too much about that. But it was really good. The keynote, I don't know, if you made the keynote. Jeff Moss started off with, and Jeff's always fun to listen to. I think he's always a blast. He had an interesting term, which was super empowered organizations or super powered individuals. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if you got anything, more out of that, but I mean, it was the thought that one person can cascade an effect across, various segments. For example, if you block a DNS, that impacts the credit card industry, and so it's just some person or somebody else making a decision. I thought that was, kind of fascinating. And Chris Krebs is always interesting to listen to as the keynote speaker on the first day as well.
Yeah, both of them were great. I was there for both, and they kept my attention the entire time, which not all keynotes do.
No.
I really like Chris Krebs as well. He had a lot to say about the kinds of positive change that we can make in the cybersecurity industry, and he's seen some things, I'm sure. So it's always good to get the experience from somebody like that who's been placed at the center of history. So how about talks? What do you think?
There's a couple, they're quite, of course you go to 4 or 5 talks a day, sometimes more depending on how your energy maintains, and then, so after a while they do start to get a little bit blurry. But there was a good couple talks that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the talk about burnout. I don't know if you made the talk about burnout.
Didn't see that one.
Yeah, it was titled Trying to Be Everything to Everyone. Let's talk about burnout. The speaker discussed, that, concerns over that surveys show that, I think it was 70 to 80% of all cybersecurity professionals call themselves burned out or are experiencing burnout, and that when they leave, they don't come back to cyber. The challenges are often that, the studies and the whatnot of how it all works is really focused, at least for burnout, is really focused on law enforcement and teachers and doctors, that type of thing. And people aren't really looking into cyber. And nowadays with the Ukraine and everything else that's going on is that the amount of burnout is really severe in our industry. And it was really, to be honest, it's like, as someone who's been in this for a while, I see it. So I have to admit that, that it wasn't overly surprising what she discussed, but it was interesting to hear that confirmation of a lot of what we've seen. Is you can't just tell somebody who's experiencing burnout, just go take a few days of vacation or go take some time off. That doesn't help, because all they do is worry about what's going on while they're gone.
You kind of have to give them permission to let their mind wander as well. Because I know a lot of folks who are like, wake up in the morning and are solving problems in the shower instead of, having their own time. And then, yeah. So what do they say? Is it about setting boundaries, or is there more to it?
It's about trying to understand what you can and cannot control. So like, know your limits, and and what do you want? Set expectations. It's not your fault. But you just have to kind of understand it, and it's not going to be a simple fix. It's not those, like I said, the fixes of of, take some vacation, take some time away doesn't help. You got to figure out what energizes you, and sometimes it just means you got to walk away, and that's unfortunate. But she had some good thoughts, and I think more than anything else was really trying to recognize the symptoms of burnout. I don't care. I'm doing the job, but I don't care if it succeeds or not. There's those types of things. Just really just figures out what do you want, and try and evaluate what you can and cannot control. So that was a good one. Another talk that I thought was really good was about attacks from the new front door in 4G and 5G. It was really interesting. Of course, my focus is mobile, so I did a lot of anything that was mobile. I tried to sneak in, and it was kind of an interesting talk. And I think there's really not a huge amount of takeaways from the talk. It was a great talk, but the biggest one is that when you think about 4G and 5G, those networks are intended for. I shouldn't say those networks, but in the classic sense of wireless, those networks and the attacks against them are against people. Right, we're attacking with smishing, we're attacking with email, false base stations, those types of things. In the 3G and even the 4G world are people attacks. But 5G is really a network for things, and so that whole complexities around what you look for have to change, because you're not thinking about how do I protect people. How do I protect things? You're looking at service APIs. You're looking at those kind of controls that maybe not, have not been the focus as much in the past, because you're really worried about the people side. So it's a really good talk.
About like edge computing as well and how that factors in 5G?
A little bit. The controls there are more, like you said, edge computing. You got to think, where are those controls? Where can you actually impact the people? And I think it's really is honestly, it didn't give a whole lot of solutions, but it's just more of like, where do you, like you said, where do you focus your attention? You got to focus to those unpatched devices, those devices that are out there, the APIs, and really, analyze that type of away from the people in 5G. And then the last talk I'll just mention real quick is Black Hat, calculating risk in the era of obscurity, which was an interesting talk. It was really the title was kind of misleading. I'll have to say that. It said reading between the lines of security advisories, which I've actually taped a session of ThreatTraq on this similar topic of security advisories. But the talk actually itself really focused on two things. One was CVSS scores are subjective, which we all know. We've said that dozens of times. CVSS scores, you can't gauge that. And even so, it's even like a time to patch, not time to exploit. Time to, it's not as important. I think that CVSS scores are treated as that gauge to patching. And then the other thing that they talked about was incomplete patches, that we're in a time where you patch something and then we find out that you really didn't get all of it, right? They're only doing partial patches. So it was an interesting talk that, security advisories have really evolved from giving all these details or even some of the details to really putting them behind, limiting it down, very tight, very fewer amounts of information, and sometimes even behind paywalls. You can't get to security information unless you're a customer. And so, the thought here is that we've got to get away from being obscure in advisories so that we know exactly what we're having to deal with. Yeah, those are 3 ones. Yeah. So Matt, any talks that, jumped out at you from Black Hat?
Oh, there was just really the one. I know there were plenty of great talks. I don't want to, if you get a chance to look at any of them, absolutely watch them. But the one that I got a real kick out of was there were two guys from New Zealand talking about GitHub Co-pilot. So this is a tool that GitHub put together to do pair programming without another human being, where they're using a trained model to try and predict the next lines of code that you're going to write when you're writing code. And they're training it off of what's on GitHub, which makes sense because GitHub has tons and tons of code, except that if you start doing this, it'll try and solve for what is most likely, not necessarily what is most secure. So if the examples you're training your model on are doing things like directly, concatenating parts of a web form input into a SQL query, it's basically including SQL injection in your code. There's all sorts of other dumb things that it could happen just because somebody wrote it once and GitHub said, well, this is the most common solution, but not the correct one. There were some fun points in that one where if you found a developer who was highly qualified and had plenty of examples of code, good code on GitHub, and you included their name in the author field of that code, Co-pilot would actually start writing more secure code.
I'm thinking, how predictable have we become that we can get an AI to write code for us?
Oh yeah. It was really fascinating, and hopefully it means that GitHub will go take a look and say, great, we can now write code based on what you've written before. Maybe we can do a better job. Maybe we can pick and choose where to train the model so that the stuff that falls out of it is inherently secure. Maybe, maybe it's possible, and maybe it's still going to be something that requires a human being to go back and review the code of. But the dream would be to write better code based on what code has already been written. That was the big one for me from Black Hat. I also spent a good amount of time in the vendor room, and also trying to find puzzle challenges, because that's kind of my thing. So there was one or two CTFs that I participated in there, but that's how I spent my Black Hat. So how about your DEF CON?
Defcon was interesting. I know that there's always the badge challenge. I know that you have a bit of an addiction to the badges there, Matt.
I do. I have a collection of my own. So why don't we show people the badge from this year, yours, and then we can show them
this year. Which was a keyboard. I don't have batteries in mine now because I don't trust these things sometimes to put batteries in them, because it's been. But I mean, you could play it as a keys, like a keyboard. There was a puzzle associated with music. It was the music theme. As far as anyone knows, there was only 2 challenges. Which was a little short. Which was short.
Short, but also kind of difficult. There was somebody I found in the hallway, and usually I don't do this, but so I was talking to somebody in the hallway about it who had written an Android app to find the answers to the second part, plugged his phone into my badge, and gave me the information I needed to complete it. So that was kind of fun. And I really wish I'd gotten that guy's name, because that's pretty sharp to knock out an Android app in one night to do that. Good for him.
It was pretty interesting, and it was just the other. I know that the funny part, at least about the official badges, is that one of the challenges was to use this phone and to call people. To find Jenny's friends was the theme, and somebody figured out, like you said, they figured out, well, if you just what's going to happen, so they just automated it, so you never actually had to pick the phone up or even to do any of the real legwork, because they said it was pretty. In fact, they said it was. The last I had heard is doing it the official way. Somebody only had gotten to 2 people. They hadn't even gotten to all the individuals that you had to call. So, yeah, exactly.
So you showed the official badge, and I'm going to show an unofficial badge, which I am very, very happy with. This is a Tron light disk badge that a company called Ironwood Cyber put together. And there's a whole culture at DEF CON called Badge Life, where people will build their own badges sort of to show off their skills or to give people a chance to play challenges. And there's so many more hardware electronic devices floating around as a result of these DEF CON Badge Life folks. And every year, I'm so amazed at how much work, how much time and energy, literal engineering, feats of engineering to build these sorts of things. So I'd love to collect them, and one of these days, I swear I'll build my own.
I saw a badge. Some young lady had a badge that was, I swear it was almost as big as she was. I'm thinking, you walk around in that, but it was huge, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really awesome. And but it's and then you got the other alternatives. They had their little Raspberry Pi in their hat that you could hack my hat. I saw a lady walking around with that, and it was really. I think that's the most fun you can have sometimes at DEF CON, is to talk to people and to just people watch. I mean, it's a different atmosphere and vibe between Black Hat and DEF CON, and DEF CON is certainly, I think, more fun with the actual people.
Oh yeah, and you get to get your hands dirty with so many more things, so many villages to go and try out new things. If you've never, tried to hack around in a payment machine or aerospace village or ICS, they just, you spend 5 minutes in any one of those and you'll pick up something new. It's pretty fun.
Or go buy lockpicks. There's a whole room just dedicated to lockpicking.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one. So for me, the one talk that really stuck out to me was called OopsSec, and that's probably not the whole title. But one of the researchers from SafeBreach was talking about operational mistakes that hackers make that allow you to go and find out more about what they were doing. And this was like an early morning Friday talk, I think. And it was great because the whole room, you'd start describing something and you'd start to hear people chuckle a little bit because they were the ones who were picking up on what the bug was before he explicitly said it. Then he'd be like, and this is SQL injection in the login form, or they've got, that you can bypass the login, or you can go and download all of the files from the remote access tool and find out who the victims are and notify them, So ultimately, whatever he had found would get used to, respond to some sort of hack that happened, which is really fascinating stuff. How about you? Any good talks?
Yeah, I have a tendency to overtake notes, take too many notes sometimes. So there was probably 3 little talks that I liked the most. I did go to the AppSec Village. I don't know if you snuck into the AppSec Village.
Didn't have time.
The only challenge with DEF CON is they had it in 3 different locations, which made it pretty complicated sometimes to get to certain venues. So I only got to the AppSec Village once, got one real good talk by a gentleman from I can't remember his name, but it's from Finland. I think he was either from Finland or the Netherlands. I can't remember, but he was really sharp. But the 3 talks I know is there was one talk, was about patients and why they should hack and improve and modify their own medical technology. Cory Doctorow, who is a science fiction author,
yep.
And I've met him before, so it was one of the things the talk was interesting to see, and I know his mindset on this kind of thing. So it wasn't really, like I said, nothing really unusual to me, but basically it just was a talk to advocate for more open communications, more open ability to modify that. The medical industry, especially things in like insulin pumps, have it's not monopolistic, but they, you got this guys making the glucose monitors are making the insulin pumps. So, and they're not in the business to try and interface the two sometimes. So if we can create an interface, then maybe, we're helping actual patients medicate themselves. And so it was really about creating the opportunity to limit, or I shouldn't say limit, but reduce the limits on medical technology that maybe, there's maybe open source or a community that can create a better tool than what even the actual official manufacturer could do.
And you let the patients, the ones who are having the medical issues, drive the feature development on that, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. And then, and a couple other, the other talk was just fascinating to me because it's a guy basically reverse engineered, not the iPhone Lightning cable, but it was about JTAG hacking. And so the issue was, iPhone Lightning cable is pretty well known. I mean, to be honest, all the specs are known. But the problem is if you want to get to some of the debugging and decrypting stuff, not decrypting, but really the JTAG stuff, you have to actually have certain types of cables. And with today's shortages, I'm trying to think of the right term, is buying those cables. They've been out of stock forever. Buying these modules and stuff have been out of stock. You just can't get them. And so this guy figured out for less than $5, he could create his own specialized cable that typically costs a couple $100, by the vendor. So he said this was, it took a lot of work. It's got a lot more to do. But it's just that's the type of effort that fascinates me that people at DEF CON do is that they don't have the money that big corporations or governments have. So they try and figure out solutions that don't require that.
That's absolutely the spirit of DEF CON.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you happen to hear about the John Deere tractor that was playing?
I did. I saw pictures. I didn't see it in person, but I saw it. They ran Doom on the John Deere tractor. I thought that was interesting.
And it wasn't even like regular Doom. It was like a modified version of Doom where you're driving a tractor out in a field.
That's funny.
That's the spirit.
Yeah, and then the other talk I wrote down is this was I always say this bad. It's hacking the iCalendar format.
Oh, I was just reading the slides from that. That one sounds really interesting.
That was probably, I'll have to say, that was probably the most not entertaining, but the most, where you could grasp it, what was going on, because we all use iCalendar, and a lot of people think of iCals as something Apple, because everything Apple is iPhone, whatever, but it's not. iCalendar has been a format that's been around. It's an RFC, and what he was able to find is there's some legacy stuff. Well, basically the iCalendar itself, the iCal, is built so you can run, like if I have Outlook or if I have some other calendar application, I can create some custom stuff. It's the whole point is to create, some customer. You don't have to go purely off the spec. And one of the things he found is that some of the, and I think Outlook, to be honest, is guilty of this, is that when you send somebody a calendar invite, it actually puts it into your calendar, like even though you haven't accepted it already. I've certainly seen that.
Yeah.
And even though you're not accepted, it kind of starts blocking that space. And it's tentative, but it's still blocking that spaces. And the problem is some of these applications can also run some of the code that's in there if you do it incorrectly. So for example, I think this one's particularly has been fixed, but it would start off, if you weren't there, even though you hadn't accepted the invite, but it was on your calendar, it would start the Skype conference call automatically. At that time. And so
it's a microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what people were abusing it by is that, well, they would, for not only that, but they would also say, hey, I'm going to have a conference call with my buddies, that we're going to leverage some company's, Skype bridge. And then they would actually send that invite to people, get it to that, late at night, 2 a.m. in the morning, get on their calendars, and it would start the bridge right then and there.
They're the ones with the license to use Skype, I guess.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It
was kind of interesting, like I said, and there's a lot of research, I think, he pointed out that in this could happen because there's the spec itself, but the spec leaves room for stuff that's not in the spec, so that vendors can do their own thing. And so it was a good talk. I really enjoyed it.
That reminds me of PDF and how overloaded that format became over the years, where you could have 3D models in a PDF file and run little snippets of something. And anytime that you get that feature creep, you'd start to think there's probably a bug in there somewhere. The more complex and wacky it gets.
Well, or where you can say, okay, here's the spec, but then if you want to run, but then in the spec itself, it leaves a space for your own custom. So as soon as you get to custom, why there's really not much of a spec anymore.
Yeah. And then you've also got implementations of that spec, and any vendor that does it's going to do it just a little bit differently. I wanted to bring up something that's sort of dear to my heart, which is the security escape room. Did you hear about this?
I saw it, but I didn't hear a lot about it. So yeah, if you've got more detail, I'd love to hear.
Oh, sure. So it was put together by CISA and Idaho National Lab, a joint venture. And they built an escape room, which is to say they put in the escape room that they had built, like a traveling escape room, into one of the rooms of the conference center. And I got in the very last run because I only found out about it late as well. And it was a nice combination of typical escape room puzzles, like finding a 4-digit code to unlock something or doing a real simple cipher, but also combined with some hacking techniques and some technical know-how. Like they had an ICS device that you had to dial in with a certain number to make sure something didn't happen. And you get to look at the Wi-Fi in the room. I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody who's going to play it. Maybe if you plan on doing this, because apparently they run it all the time. Maybe you don't listen to everything I have to say here, but there's some real fun moments. And they spent a lot of time. They built a storyline. There were characters represented in it. There was a live actor, which I won't spoil for anybody, but really made me laugh when that happened. I loved it. I mean, for me, it's less of a security educational moment as it is a reinforcement. It's definitely at the level of people who already know how to use the kinds of tools you would find in Kali or in a forensics image. But a lot of fun to play and definitely cool. I played it with a large group. It was meant for 10, and I think they snuck like 22 people in for the last play, and it was chaos because people who play escape rooms have played enough, you kind of need to coordinate effectively in order to know who's got this key that belongs on the other side of the room and who knows this PIN number that belongs over here. It was madness. We eventually got there. We eventually solved it. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I'm a fan of that style of learning and reinforcement myself.
Yeah. You're talking about CISA, and I thought I had to show my cube with Jen Easterly's signature. Maybe
move it a little bit. It's out of focus, but if people can see that. Yeah, that's cool.
So I got to talk to her. She's, you don't often meet a person who's been Senate confirmed, especially at a hacker conference, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, so it was, like I said, I don't know. Overall, it was fun. I hadn't been back to Black Hat since 2018, or to Defcon, of course. And it's just, it was a good return for me.
I went last year in the midst of, and it was still very much a hybrid con at the time. Not a lot of people showed up, which was nice because you and I both know that the lines at DEF CON can be ridiculous. But it was nice to see the conventions both back in full swing and operating as they usually do. I wanted to call out a few weird things that I saw. I'm from New Jersey, and I had never seen a Cake Boss vending machine in my life, but they're all over the place. You can just get a slice of cake from Cake Boss. There was a man in a stilt walking Elvis costume who was hiding near the men's rooms. Gave me a scare at least once. Did not expect him to start singing either. He sang. Anything stood out to you, wacky or Vegas in a nutshell?
There's so much Vegas. It's really kind of interesting. I think more than anything else that sticks out to me is just that there's always people. There's always people on the street. I mean, I went to the airport on Sunday, and I think it was 4:30 in the morning, and there was crowds in the casino and people on the street. And I think that's it's not necessarily wacky. It's just that just that there's so many people, and of course, when you're in the middle of a recession, however you want to call it, just to see the people, there is kind of nice, to be honest.
Just thinking New York never sleeps and Las Vegas never stops partying, maybe.
Maybe, I guess. And Black Hat and DEF CON are certainly no exceptions, right? We know DEF CON has historically had a overall impression that it's they start late because people are out late, and
they go late, yeah.
And so it's good, but it's the camaraderie I think that you get from going to these events. Is everybody's there for the same purpose, right? Whether it's to be protecting or to be attacking, but it's all that same focus on cyber. And it's just kind of nice just to see the people out and talking to them.
It was nice to run into folks in the hallway who I hadn't seen in a couple of years as well, and just give them a quick hi or stop and chat for a while.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and meet new people. I met a whole bunch of new people.
Yeah.
Just I was talking to one guy and he knew somebody else, and eventually that that chain of relationship starts to develop.
It's. I think this year's DEF CON 30 theme was homecoming, and it did feel like that this year.
It did. I agree.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun chatting with you about your experience and sharing mine. And maybe I'll see you out in the desert next year.
Yeah, I hope.
Thanks, John.